Liu Zongyuan, an old fisherman. An old fisherman spends the night by the west cliff, drawing water from the clear Xiang by firelight. At sunrise, when the mist has cleared, he is nowhere to be seen. Only a faint echo of oars among mountains and green water. Looking back, all I see is water flowing to the far horizon, and heedless clouds above the cliff, drifting one by one. So here we go back to poems by Liu Zongyuan, which is a poet we've encountered very briefly before. And his poem makes a very interesting contrast with the previous one, the Elegy of the Stone Drums of Han Yu. That was a gargantuan, quite a big poem with lots of cultural references. This, on the contrary, is a very short poem, no more than 6 lines, and pretty simple in its imagery, in the topic it treats. It practically doesn't require any comment and notes beyond reading the lines themselves and making a comment. Now, I imagine the positioning of the poems is also significant. Han Yu and Liu Zongyuan were contemporaries. They were both members of the Guwen movement, the movement for reforming the prose writing during the Tang Dynasty in the way of following a simpler, clearer style inspired in the old models of the Zhou and Han dynasties. And in fact, in the mini canon of writers of prose of the 5 great writers of prose of the Tang and Song dynasty, 2 are from the Tang dynasty, and they are precisely Han Yu and Liu Zongyuan. Now, they weren't friends as far as I'm aware of. They were members of different cliques in the courtly infighting of the early 9th century. Liu Zongyuan fared much worse than Han Yu. Han Yu had his own stints of exile, but he was generally successful and achieved quite high positions in the imperial administration. Liu Zongyuan, on the contrary, was almost all of his official life an exile, mostly banished to remote areas in the south, and he practically never again returned to the capital or to important positions. So, what about this poem? So, in his southern exile, Liu Zongyuan made a lot of poetry and a lot of prose that reflected on the customs, on the lives of these poor southern peoples. He has a especially good hand at depicting the lower classes, like in this case fishermen. And he has a lot of poems on nature, and he had a really intense love for natural landscapes through which he roamed in his free time, of which he probably had a lot due to the minor posts and positionings he was given in his exile. So this is a poem, quite a straight poem, about an old fisherman that is fishing at night and that then goes away with his boat. What's the topic of this poem, or what are the topics that we can mention? So the main one would be the depiction, perhaps would be the depiction of the life of a humble person, but more than the humble person itself, or himself, who doesn't really appear in the poem, we might say landscape is the real protagonist of this poem. This poem is clearly located through the reference to the Xiang River in the area of Hunan. In the area, the Xiang was one of the affluents of the Jiangzi. So this is the semi-tropical southern area of China, an area with lots of lakes and big mountains next to the rivers. A landscape that Liu Zongyuan fell in love with. And that is the real topic and the real protagonist of this poem. This mysterious southern landscape of absences in which an old fisherman plays a part as an unseen actor that moves around and whose search the poetic persona attempts while gazing, while contemplating different aspects of the landscape. You could say that absence is the real protagonist of this poem, the absence of the fisherman, who is never directly or clearly depicted. In the first stanza, in the first couplet, we get a very brief glimpse at what he is doing, but it's in the dark. We don't see him clearly. And in the next lines, he is nowhere to be seen. We can only see the after effects of his passing. Yeah, the echo of his roars floating through the mountains and the waters. The water where his boat sailed away, perhaps the ripples or the foam created by that passing boat and fisherman, but not the fisherman again himself. So, as I said, a very interesting poem, more in the absences it paints than in the things it actually depicts. As I said, the poem is quite short. It has 6 lines in 3 couplets, and they go like this. Let's check them and comment them piece by piece. An old fisherman spends the night by the west cliff, drawing water from the clear Xiang by firelight. So in the first image we get an old fisherman. Remember, fishermen are members of the lower classes, working people, but they were also used a lot in the classical literature as symbols for the retired life, for the life of ease and contentment, away from bureaucracy, away from the court. And this connects with an image that appeared in one of the elegies of Chu in the Chu Tzu from the Han Dynasty, in which a fisherman gives a scholar official the advice of retiring from office when times are turbulent and just enjoying himself. So we get an old fisherman. We don't see him. We just know that he is spending the night by West Cliff, which was a place in the south rife with historical connotations. A massive battle had been fought there during the Three Kingdoms period. But he's not doing anything epic or glorious. He's just drawing water from the river. The Xiang is a clear river. He's drawing water, probably for drinking, maybe for cooking, by firelight, because it's at night. Yeah. We imagine he might have been fishing, he might have stopped now, he might be in the shore, and he might be boiling some of his catch, or perhaps just drinking some water. At sunrise, when the mist has cleared, he is nowhere to be seen. Only a faint echo of oars among mountains and green water. Now, if we hoped to be able to get a better glance through the poet's description of the fisherman in the morning when sunlight comes out, we are sorely disappointed. After the mists of morning have disappeared, the poet, as if he were just a watcher of the scene located in a specific spot, the poet tells us we cannot see the fisherman. He's disappeared from sight. He is no longer to be seen. He can be heard, though. So the visual is neutralized, the visual is absent, but the oral is present. We can hear a faint echo of the oars, and they make a nice, faint background noise accompanying the marvelous landscape of mountains and water that surrounds the poetic persona. So an absence of sight, but a presence of sound. Let's continue with the last couplet, and in the last couplet, the absence becomes total. It says, looking back, all I see is water flowing to the far horizon, and heedless clouds above the cliff, drifting one by one. The emphasis is again on the fact that no longer can any trace of the fisherman be seen. We can only see the vast expanse of the water as far as the eye can tell, and clouds, heedless clouds, floating around, drifting one by one. Now, floating clouds have always been a symbol of the disengaged person, the Taoist recluse or sage, who is not tied to the limitations of the world. Also sometimes it has been used as an image of exile, of scholar officials who have to leave the court. They're like drifting clouds floating throughout the empire. So they're very typical in images of exile and of abandoning the world. And we might imagine that in this pure image of Liu Zongyuan, seeing clouds floating by, He may be thinking of himself as a floating cloud. He may be thinking of the fisherman as a floating cloud. I don't know to what level we can interpret this poem as just a literal, just take it at its face value, as a literal description of a scene, maybe from an outing in which Liu Zongyuan went out, saw or guessed a fisherman had been close to a place where he was now, heard some oars in the distance, and just kept looking entranced at the peaceful landscape and the silent landscape, the non-humanly populated landscape, enmeshed in this wonderful natural setting? Or to what point is he being symbolic? Is the fisherman, as I said, a symbol for Taoist reclusion, for Taoist sages, for abandoning the world? The cloud image in the last line would seem to point in this way. We're looking at floating clouds, people who are independent and free from the dust of the world, whether they like it or not. All that can be seen is this watery realm, shiny, the water of the south, the many rivers. And in this watery kingdom, floating clouds, drifting, without any sense of purpose. So, well, nice poem, quite brief and quite synthetic. Not much to say about it, except what I have just mentioned. It has a literal meaning in which we get a view at a peaceful, natural landscape where humanity has become absent. On the other hand, it can have some symbolic overtones or interpretations that point towards a reflection on the life of the retired or exiled scholar. So, quite a nice poem. Liu Zongyuan has a more famous one called River Snow, I think, that will probably appear in this anthology, and in which a fisherman also appears. But we'll comment on that when we get there.